morning, good evening, depending on your time zone, and welcome to another episode of our user group, Italian Power BI user group. And today we have the pleasure having Christian Wade from Microsoft talking about ALM Toolkit. As you know, we are creating a series about external tools, and today we have the ALM Toolkit creator here with us. Just few information today. There's Christian Wade, principal program manager from Microsoft. He is working in analysis services for 2 decades. And this session will be astonishing, so don't miss it. Call all your colleagues and tell them that there is a very incredible session by Christian Wade. This is Riccardo from Lucient Italy. I will be in the back. I will do the production and I will manage the Q&A panel and pose all your questions to Christian as soon as they come. As always, we are using a Teams live event for producing this event. It's hosted on live event. You have the Q&A panel, so you can use it for questions, and we will interrupt Christian when all the questions will come. As always, we will upload the materials of this session on our user group site, so you can use the QR code to get the library that will be created for this session. If you like, you can follow on our channels, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Meetup. LinkedIn and Meetup to get up to date to all our events, future events, and YouTube to see this session and all the recorded session from all the speakers that we had during this year. Just a few words about the next event. We will close the external tools series with the tabular editor creator, Daniel Otikier, that will talk about tabular editor on Thursday, the 18th at 6:30 Central Europe time. Don't miss it. And as always, the call for speakers is always open. So if you want to talk, have a speech on our user group, just ping us. We want to you. And with just a reminder, as always, we're waiting for the next release, maybe the January or the February at this point release of Power BI Desktop. And as soon as it is released, we will organize our open microphone meeting with all the user group users. Don't miss it. And remember that it's just 1 week left for the Power Platform Bootcamp, and also Italy will have its top. It will be on the 19th, and we will have 4 tracks with speakers from all around the world, both MVP, Microsoft employees, and Microsoft certified professional in the 4 fantastic tracks. Power BI User Group Italy has also contributed to organizing this event. So go to follow the QR code and subscribe to this free event in order to improve your Power BI experience. So that's it. I don't want to steal time to Christian. Christian, it's up to you, the microphone to you, and enjoy this fantastic session.
Thank you very much indeed, Riccardo. I appreciate it very much. Hello, everybody. Ciao amici, parliamo di Power BI. My Italian is very, very limited, but I may occasionally say molto bravo, molto bravo. But I'm very happy to be here with my Italian friends. I enjoy my time with Marco and Alberto, who I'm sure you're very familiar with. And so I'm very happy to be here. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Just 1 second. Share. Okay. So we will talk about the ALM Toolkit. As Riccardo said, my name is Christian Wade. I'm the program management lead for analysis services in Power BI. So my program management team kind of owns or overlooks SQL Server analysis services, Azure analysis services, and analysis services capabilities in Power BI. As you may know, we have been bringing the analysis services capabilities to Power BI to make Power BI a superset of analysis services. You know, we launched XML recently, we launched large models recently, we are going to launch object level security soon, we will launch backup restore soon, and we also, my team also focuses on and drives features for the kind of enterprise BI scenarios for things like scalability of really large models, for things like incremental refresh and the aggregations feature, and many of these features for semantic models, for these large models that are owned and managed by IT normally, for many, many users distributed across the world, right? For example, that use translation so that the data set can speak lots of languages, all right? So those are the types of features that we work on. And so ALM Toolkit is based on a tool that I did many, many years ago in another life, it seems now, in a galaxy far, far away. And I created this tool. It's called BISM Normalizer. It runs in Visual Studio, and it is an addition to SQL Server Data Tools, which was the kind of the traditional or legacy tooling for tabular models. And ALM Toolkit is based on the same code, the same, the UI is a new UI, but it's part of the same build. You know, when I fix a bug in one, I fix a bug in both at the same time. And it's not in Visual Studio because most Power BI users do not use Visual Studio. So it's a standalone tool. And this differences grid is actually a TypeScript grid. It could run in a browser one day. This is why the Mac Software logo is here, because they built this differences grid. It's called the Monaco diff control. It runs in Visual Studio Code. And so it runs a local Chromium instance, just like Power BI Desktop. If you look at the report view in Power BI Desktop, you create the report, you publish it to the service, and it's the same report, exactly the same that you see in the browser as what you see in Power BI Desktop. So it's the same technology with this, where it hosts a local Chromium instance. Power BI Desktop hosts a local Chromium instance as well, a local browser for the report view. And also even the modeling view now is also TypeScript based and will be hosted in the browser one day. All right. So the types of scenarios, the types of things that you can do with ALM Toolkit, there are many, many different things that you can use it for. It's very similar to deployment pipelines that you may be familiar with in Power BI that we launched recently. And the usage of deployment pipelines is very high. And you may know deployment pipelines. It allows you to set up separate workspaces, one for development, one for test, one for production. And then it does a difference analysis to see, you know, which reports, data sets, soon to be paginated reports, interactive reports, soon to have data flows, dashboards, all of the Power BI artifacts. It checks to see if they are the same in each of the workspaces in development, test, and production. And it tells you, oh, do you want to pick this one to deploy? And it lets you, it provides a very visual guided experience for deployment, for application lifecycle management, for deployment of objects across the environments. So we call this a low code, no code experience, right? So it's kind of like Power BI is very much geared for It works for enterprise BI and self-service BI. So it works for non-technical users that maybe don't write very much code, but have a visual guided experience. And so we work for both, right? So, you know, we provide deployment pipelines for a visual guided experience, and then you have all of the programmability and automation for automated deployments with CI/CD, etc. as well. Okay, so it's very similar to deployment pipelines, but it is just for the data sets. It does not work for data flows. It doesn't work for the reports or the dashboards, etc. All right. It's also very similar to schema compare in SQL Server Data Tools and other schema diff tools like Redgate SQL Compare that now ships in Visual Studio. There is when you deploy a new version of a data warehouse, you don't drop and recreate the whole data warehouse. It could take days. So you just do a schema diff is one of the techniques. You can do a schema diff and apply just the new columns or the changes to the schema and still keep all of the historical data, right? So it's kind of like these. So it's very useful with incremental refresh, right? Because it lets you deploy if you've added some measures or added some DAX objects and you want to deploy just those objects and still keep the historical data, you can do that. So I will show that in the demo. All right. And you can use it just for managing the metadata. You know, even if you're doing traditional CI/CD automated deployments through DevOps pipelines, for example, you will often have many different repos, you know, a bug fix branch or developers making changes on certain branches, and they want to merge the changes back to the main branch. It's not as simple as just a JSON merge of the metadata of the data set. There are many dependencies between the objects, like you know, a relationship that relates to a column that doesn't exist, or you know, a table with a partition that refers to an M expression that doesn't exist. There is many dependencies between the objects, and you could have valid JSON, but it will give you an error when you try and load that metadata to the analysis services engine. So this provides a kind of safeguard, some guardrails to ensure the JSON is correct in terms of the analysis services definition. Okay, so you can use it for you know, doing different merge across repos. You can also use it for kind of master metadata management, right? So you want to just reuse some conformed dimension definitions, like maybe you have a big data warehouse with 50 tables and you have some like 3 or 4 separate tabular models and broken out by subject area, and then you might have the same customer dimension, the same date dimension across all of those tabular models, and you want to just define those dimensions once and reuse them in the other tabular models. You can also use it to harvest objects for corporate BI. But you can bridge the gap between self-service and corporate BI. So you know, maybe an analyst discovered something interesting in a PBIX, or you've been doing prototyping in Power BI Desktop, and you want to harvest those objects to the central corporate business intelligence model, right? Now, many of you may think, well, you know, corporate BI goes through much more rigor, many more definitions. You need source to target mappings, you need business definitions, you need to align with corporate naming standards and things like that. And when you harvest these models from self-service BI, it's difficult to ensure the quality of the model. But there is definitely a use case for this. We see this a lot. We used to see it for prototyping scenarios in the old days with import from Power Pivot into analysis services. And we see this a lot. There used to be in the analysis services web interface. There used to be an import from PBIX that would serve this purpose in the same type of thing. And it was used a lot. So there is definitely the use case for this, to harvest some objects, to take some objects, to take some tables, take some M expressions, take some DAX objects from one model and put them in another one, and then clean it up. You iterate it in your development environment. You make sure that the names align with corporate naming standards. And there is some work required, but it still accelerates the process, and it will more likely retain the essence or the original intent of the model that you're harvesting from. Okay, and you can automate it as well if you want from a command line for automated deployment and CI/CD. But most of the use cases are in the top half of this list, right? So, you know, flexible, easy deployment with guardrails, maybe without having to spend a lot of time setting up, automated CI/CD. Maybe you're still, the phase of the project hasn't reached that yet, and then to just reuse objects across different repos and branches. Okay, so I'll just finish here with the slides, and then I'll pause to see if there's any questions. So to set it up, you need to install it, which you can get from the website. You can download the installer. And to use it in Power BI, it needs to be in Power BI Premium, because you need the XML endpoint, and you need it to be set to read write. So you go into the capacity settings and you set the capacity to be read write. And this gives you access to the analysis services engine that is behind the data set in Power BI. And you can connect to it with many of the analysis services tools like Tabular Editor and DAX Studio. And you can deploy SQL Server Data Tools models, and you can script, and you can run PowerShell, and you can use ALM Toolkit on it as well, because all of these tools and processes use the APIs that depend on the XML endpoint. So by doing this, Power BI is inheriting a large ecosystem of developers, of partners, of tools and processes from analysis services that has been built up over, over 20 years. Analysis services is over 20 years old now, and it's been a market dominator for many years, right? For well over 10 years, right? So Power BI is inheriting all of that from analysis services through the XML endpoint, which you need to enable read write for the ALM Toolkit to work. Okay. Now, another point that is worth making is that you should, if you're using the XML endpoint for ALM Toolkit, or for any of the other tools that like Tabular Editor, and for the other scripting and CI/CD, etc., all of those tools and processes will work better if you set the data set to have the large model or the large data set storage format, because it will be more efficient. Even you don't need to have like a 50 gigabyte model. You can have like a 1 gigabyte model or a 3 gigabyte model. And when you modify the metadata, maybe you add a measure or something, it will be much quicker if you have this large data set storage format set to true. Okay. All right. And then to use the ALM Toolkit, it's a very simple tool. I'm going to give you a demo, but really there's just like, it does some complex things. The code is quite complex in terms of the dependency analysis and the metadata management, but to use it, it is very simple. There's just 5 buttons and it's very simple. So I will show you how to use it. Okay. So with that, I will do a demo, but I'll just pause there for a moment, Ricardo, and see if there's any questions or comments or anything.
Yes, I think it's correct to stop for a moment because we have a lot of questions. So
great.
Let's try. Okay.
Okay.
There's a question from Carlo that asks if you can spoiler the release date for Power BI Desktop new release, if you know it.
For the February release, I'm not sure. To be honest, it could be any day. We normally try and do it in the first half of the month, but there are many. We don't normally know till very close. Sometimes we know ahead of time, like if there's a big conference and we want to release Power BI Desktop on the same day as the conference. Other times it needs to go through an extensive testing process. So I don't know for sure. I will tell you that the March desktop release, Daniel will be here with you next week. So the external tools capability will be enhanced in the March desktop release. I would expect some news there, but yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know the exact date in February that it's going to release, I'm afraid.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much.
Okay,
and maybe this is more related to your job. The object level security, when will it be released?
Okay, so thank you. Good question. Sorry, let me just close this. So the object level security, we on the release notes, it says by the end of February, and we are still on track by the end of February. So I'd say 90% by the end of February, 10% the beginning of March, but we're very close, very close. And I will tell you now that you use Tablet Editor to, or if you can use XML Endpoint scripting, you can use the same techniques to define object level security that you did in analysis services. But if you want to do it in the Power BI Desktop model, you will use Tablet Editor to author the object level security rules. And so I'd expect by the end of February, we're waiting for some service components to be deployed to the Power BI service, and it will be officially supported with external tools, 99% sure, in the March Power BI Desktop release, but it will work from the end of February. We should be announcing it around the end of February, beginning of March.
Great. So March, it will be a great month for Power BI.
Yes, big month. Yeah.
And another question, do you know if there will be support for deployment pipelines for pro licenses?
I don't think so, but I believe that there will. I'm not 100% sure. I'm about 90% sure that there will be support for deployment pipelines with premium per user licenses. Okay. Which, if you have a pro license, you will be able to upgrade to the premium per user by just paying the incremental cost. You wouldn't be the full cost of premium per user if you already have a pro license. So I'm pretty sure that you will get it with premium per user at least. Okay.
And another interesting question, I don't know if maybe it's a very big answer, but someone is asking, in your opinion, what is missing from Power BI premium perspective in order to overcome analysis services? You have mentioned that you are building Power BI Premium as a superset of Azure Analysis Services or analysis services in general. And in your personal opinion, what is missing from Power BI Premium in order to overcome analysis services?
Good question. Good question. So the big ones, some of them have been released very recently. Some of the big ones, like XMLA, is like an octopus with tentacles everywhere, right? It's like there's a vast ecosystem of tools and processes that work with analysis services that can now work with Power BI datasets because of the XML endpoint. So that's number one. That is now generally available. Then large models we launched in December. It's now generally available as of December. So that you can get up to the limit of the capacity size instead of the 10 gigabyte limit. So that's another critical one. And then we already discussed object level security is coming soon. Then we have backup restore I can tell you we're looking at in the second quarter. So April, May, June, we will announce Backup Restore. And Backup Restore, you will you have the ADLS Gen 2 account that you have for data flows in Power BI Premium. You can put the backup files in there, and you can use Backup Restore from SQL Server Management Studio like you do for analysis services, right? So that's another critical one. So that one is coming by the summer, before the summer, I believe, hopefully soon, could be quite soon. And then another one that we want to do around the summer is the asynchronous refresh REST API for these really large data sets that you can submit a REST API call to invoke a refresh, disconnect, you get a transaction ID, you check back on the status, and it will do batch commits. It's more efficient to refresh these large models. It's more reliable, and because with if you do it like from SSMS, you do a refresh of a large data set that takes 2 hours. It's not like with analysis services, SQL Server analysis services on premises that has like a TPC connection to through the local network to the data set that's more reliable. When you go to the cloud, you need to go through an HTTP layer. So if you can do it so that you can invoke the refresh, get the ID, and then keep polling the REST API to check the status, it's more reliable than having to retain this HTTP connection for many hours, right? And like I said, we're doing some optimize. The analysis services version of the asynchronous refresh REST API has many optimizations like batch commits and everything. I expect that to launch in the summer. And then what is left after that? Then we have scale out. We are thinking about how to deal with scale out on the Premium Gen 2 platform, because once Premium Gen 2 is generally available, the hardware that we will be using we've been doing some testing, and hardly any customers on Azure Analysis Services, even with scale out, go beyond the CPU limits that will be available on the biggest SKU for Premium Gen 2 once it's generally available with the new hardware. That's the current plan. But then other users use scale out for other things, not just the CPU for concurrency, for high concurrency of many users. They use it also for refresh isolation, so that you can take the right node, the processing node, out of the query pool to do the refresh without affecting the users who are submitting queries on the read-only replicas, the query nodes. So we will solve that. I don't have a time frame for that one right now. That's probably the biggest one. But so without the scale out, we'll have all of these big items done probably around the summer. And then there are some small things that are still remaining, right? Like things just work a little bit differently. There's the different security model in Power BI. It uses the build permission. The gateway model is a little bit different, and there are just going to be there's no server properties. There's a few little things that we still need to tidy up to make the transition easier. But we will have all of the big rocks to make Power BI a superset of analysis services around the summer, except scale out, and we're figuring out scale out at the moment. Does that answer the question?
Well, I think yes, and it opens a lot of new questions maybe. Yes. But yes, thank you very much for this comprehensive answers. And okay. We have a few questions more. Amedeo is asking if I read it to you. Would it be possible to have an estimate of when we'll be allowed to download from service the PBIX file that have been edited with XML endpoints?
Yes, I would love to have a better answer for this. I wish I did. I mean, I know that
call your lawyer if you want.
Yeah, for many customers, like even for large models, so you can't do it for incremental refresh models because Power BI Desktop cannot handle all of the partitions that we create. right? The problem is that there is a lot of work for Power BI Desktop to be hardened, to be resilient, durable to the changes that other tools do, not just Power BI Desktop. It's like a jealous lover. It doesn't like anyone else touching the data set, right? Because it doesn't know it might crash, right? If you were to bring in many partitions in the Power BI Desktop model, for example, then Power BI Desktop will crash, right? So and there's many other things that it would. There are many little things that Power BI Desktop does in its own way what would cause it to crash. So we need to do that work. We need the desktop hardening work, and then we will be able to enable all those things: XML update, download to PBIX, the incremental refresh download to PBIX, the large models download to PBIX. Now that one's a little bit different. It's not necessarily because the metadata of the model has changed. It's because the large models format stores the data set differently. When you do not, the traditional way that Power BI Desktop that Power BI stores the data set in the service is it has an ABF backup for every data set, so that when you do download to PBIX, the PBIX is the zip file and it has the ABF backup within it. Whereas large models doesn't do that, right? That's why when you do you change a measure on the data set in the service, it's much quicker with large models because it doesn't create this ABF backup as part of the same transaction, which for a 50 gigabyte model could take 10 minutes, right? So with large models, the way we store the data set is different, which means today is incompatible with download to PBIX. But with a large model of 50 gigabyte, you wouldn't want to download to PBIX anyway, because no one wants to download a 50 gigabyte PBIX. So what we would like to do for large models is, and all of the other ones as well, all of them, we would like to do download to PBIT. So I'm happy for you to keep lobbying and asking for that, because I keep lobbying and asking for that all of the time. I want Power BI Desktop to work with download to PBIX, download to PBIT, with large models, XML updates, incremental refresh, everything. But it's not going to happen, within the next 6 months, because there is a lot of work that needs to happen in Power BI Desktop, unfortunately. So we keep asking for it. It's going to get done eventually, but I just don't have a time frame right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. We have a few more questions, but I think that we can go on with your session, and I will keep this question.
I can answer one more if you want. One more is fine. I don't mind.
Okay. There's Cesare asking what arguments can we use with companies and admins that are skeptical about enabling read and write capabilities on XML endpoint? Are there any real downside with this option? I think it's connected to external tools, because we had this more or less the same question during the DAX Studio session that Marco Russo has had last week. There are a lot of companies that don't allow people using external tools in their organization, and also the XML endpoint read and write. They decide not to enable it. So
yeah. So it's a fair question. I will just say this, that traditional corporate BI that's owned and managed by IT is, in the old days, would all be on analysis services, and analysis services uses the XML endpoint. You can't switch it off, but you can limit the access with security, with roles. And I will say also that a very high proportion of premium customers have enabled it. They've come into here and set it to read write. So I don't have a great answer, but there is security around it, and it's Up until recently, all of corporate BI did this, on the dominant corporate BI platform. And, it supports the programmability model for management of data sets, which is normally critical for these enterprise BI deployments. So, I mean, most people would agree to it, but I understand it's a fair question. And the main answer is just to use security roles and protect the data sets.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes, we can go on with your session.
Okay, sure.
And we will have another Q&A stop when you want.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right, perfect. And we're going to run for another 25 minutes, right? 25 minutes?
Yes, it's up to you. We can also go a little bit further if you have time, if you want.
Okay.
It's
okay.
Up to you.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I need to check my calendar, but
yes,
I should have checked ahead of time, but it's fine. So no problem. Okay, so I'm here in Power BI Desktop, and this is my semantic model that I've done in Power BI Desktop, right? And I've got many tables, and I have already deployed this to the Power BI service. And let's say I have many reports in different countries that are using the data from this data set, and I used incremental refresh. So the version of the data set in the service has like maybe 3 billion rows and 70 gigabytes of data. All right, and many users using it today. All right, now then I come back here and I want to make some enhancements to this data set. I want to add some measures, I want to add some calculation groups, and maybe I want to add translations, etc. I might want to make some enhancement with Tabular Editor, etc. And so let's say I've made some changes to this data set, and now I want to deploy the new version, right? And again, I used incremental refresh on this data set. So the version of the data set that I have here in Power BI Desktop is very small. It's maybe a few megabytes. But the version in the service might be 70 gigabytes because it has 3 billion rows, because it uses incremental refresh, right? So I don't have 100 gigabytes of memory on my laptop, but so the version here is very small, but the version in the service is very big because of incremental refresh, right? So now I'm ready to deploy this new version of the data set. So I come to publish, right? And then I select my workspace. And then it says, do I want to replace the data set? And I do not want to replace the data set because I don't, if I replaced it with this one, I would lose all of the historical data, all of the 3 billion rows of data. I don't want to lose all of that data, right? It could take 3 hours to reload all of that historical data, and that would mean downtime for my users, and I don't want to do that, right? So what can I do? Well, first thing, I'm going to click on this View Impact button. It's going to take me up to the Power BI service, to the lineage view, and we will see the data set and all of the reports and consumers that are consuming data, even in other workspaces. I can notify all of the report owners that I'm going to deploy some new capabilities to this data set. And so that's all great. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the settings of the workspace, so the premium tab. And then here we have the workspace connection, right? And this is using the XML endpoint. If you enable the XML endpoint, you can use this like the analysis services server name to connect to the analysis services engine that is behind Power BI, and then connect to each analysis services model that is behind the Power BI data set, right? And you'll notice I also have the large data set storage format set as well, so that my XML write updates are going to work faster, especially for anything bigger than 0.5 gigabyte. It's going to be faster. It doesn't need to be 70 gigabytes. This is going to work better for the XML write updates as well, right? So I copy this thing into my clipboard, so that I copy this server name, and then back in Power BI Desktop, I will cancel from here. I go to External Tools, And of course, I have many external tools. This thing is not generally available yet, and already we've run out of space. I can do, there's one now that can open Profiler against desktop. That I can check my Tableau report that I think no one has used this report for a long time. I can, I can obviously run Tablet Editor that Daniel Ottekia built, and actually Daniel Ottekia built this whole ribbon as part of the Power BI contributor program. So I'd just like to call that out. And like I said, we're gonna make an announcement with this in the March desktop release. So this is great. So thanks to Daniel. And you've got DAX Studio, etc. So you've seen all of this, right? So I'm going to open ALM Toolkit instead. And then it picked up, just like DAX Studio and Tablet Editor, it picks up whatever the current Power BI desktop data set is. And that's what the default is for the source. And the target, it remembered from the last time I ran it, and it's the same server name or workspace connection, rather. It's the same workspace connection that we use in place of the managed services server name that we saw in the Power BI service, right? And from here I can do whatever I want. Like I can swap them around. I can have the source be another data set in the service. It can be a file. It can be an offline file like a BIM or a PBIT file, etc. But we will keep it as the source is Power BI desktop. The target is the workspace. Now, if the target was a desktop file, that would not be very common for the same reasons we were discussing earlier, that desktop needs to be hardened to changes that it doesn't do itself. It's a jealous tool, right? Which is why Tablet Editor, it can modify, Tablet Editor can modify calculation groups, perspectives, translations, and measures, but not tables and M expressions, for example, because Power BI Desktop hasn't been hardened to the external metadata changes. Exactly the same reason that you can't download a PBIX, right? Once you do XML updates, it's exactly the same reason. Okay, so I'm going to do this comparison, right? And I'll connect up to the Power BI service. And then once it's connected, it will do the schema diff, and it will list all of the objects in the source and the target, and it lists the differences between each. So this is very similar to the deployment pipelines, right? If you use deployment pipelines, you will recognize this, right? So, you have the objects that are the same, like this currency table is the same, and you have some objects that are different, and it tells you that some of them are missing in the target, some of them are missing in the source. And the ones that are different, it tells you what's different about them. It does a full difference analysis of the JSON, right? And so here we have this game table is the one with incremental refresh. And so it has many partitions that are created in the target model. And I don't want to lose the partitions, or I will lose the 3 billion rows, right? I do not want to mess with the partitions. So I cannot just replace the table with the definition from the source. So what can I do? If I really want to update the table, if I want to change a data type, or I want to delete a column and still retain the partitions, which is, there are some cases where I would want to do that. Maybe adding a column, I need to refresh everything, right? But at least deleting a column or changing a data type or something, some things I can keep the historical data and still update the table. And if I want to do that, then I have to come into the options, and there's many options here. It says for table updates, retain partitions. Just for refresh policy-based partitions, I can merge translations and merge perspective selections. Many different options here, right? Including the refreshes that it will do when it does the deployment, right? So I'll leave this as it is. Now, in this case, I'm not going to update it at all. I'm just going to skip it, right? I'm just going to say skip. And then I don't touch that definition of that table at all. So just like deployment pipelines, you can pick and choose exactly what objects you want to deploy, and it lets you be very responsive to the user's needs, right? You may be in your development environment, you have a lot of junk that you don't want to deploy yet, but you need to push a bug fix. You need to push one DAX measure because there's a bug or something, and you need to do it urgently. You don't have the time to wait for a full deployment or something like that. So you can just pick and choose what you want to deploy to be more responsive and agile with respect to your users' needs, right? And so I will skip the game table. And let's say for whatever reason, I don't want to deploy any of these objects either, right? For whatever reason, I'm going to, control select, I'm going to skip all of these, right? I skip all of those objects and I'm not going to touch any of those because I'm still working on those and I don't need to worry about those right now. And then for deletes, I have this trip table and these measures. And so often when you're harvesting objects from one model to another model, maybe when you were doing a prototype in Power BI Desktop, or you will reuse a conform dimension or something, whatever is in the target model might be a mature model with hundreds of objects. You don't want to touch any of those, right? You want to delete, sorry, you do not want to delete any of those. So you want to skip all of the deletes in some cases, right? So I could skip them all individually, right? I can skip. But if I have hundreds of them, it's better to skip them all in one go. So I'm going to put it to delete, and then I'm going to say skip all objects missing in source, and all of those missing in source delete objects get skipped in one go. There could be hundreds of them, right? So I'm now going to just focus on just the objects that are different. So you can see the ones I skipped, and I have some translations here, some metadata translations that I use Tabular Editor to author, and I have this calculation group with a calculation item. And so I want to just push these items only, right? So I'm going to validate the selection, and it's going to check that I'm not going to break the model, right? So you may know, like if you've used Schema Compare and Redgate SQL Compare and the relational database products for Schema Compare, they let you do many things that will cause problems, right? They let you create a new column on a table, a non-nullable column on a table that already has data. So then you create this non-nullable column on a table with data. It's going to error when you run the script, right? So this tool will try to avoid anything that would cause a problem. Anything that is going to, it's like we said earlier, it's not as simple as a JSON merge. There is many interdependencies between the tabular model objects, and it's going to check the whole dependency tree, right? So, a table with a partition that refers to an M expression that doesn't exist, or in this case, I've got for calculation groups to work, you need to set discourage implicit measures to true. Let's say I didn't know that, right? So I just skipped it. I said, I don't worry about that. Let's just run it anyway. So then I validate, and then it's going to say, sorry, you cannot create the calculation group because you don't have discourage implicit measure set to true. And then because you can't create the calculation group, then you can't create the calculation items either. If I skip the calculation group, it would have been the same thing, right? So it's going to check. It's going to be like guardrails. Just like with deployment pipelines, it says it will not allow you to deploy. It will validate to make sure that you will not deploy a report that refers to a data set that doesn't exist, for example, right? So it's the same type of experience where it will validate the integrity of the target model. So in this case, let's just go ahead and update this again. And now I run it again and everything should be good again. All right. Now I can I can report the differences to an Excel report for auditing. I can generate a script and I can apply later. I can open it in SSMS. It will be a tabular model scripting language script. Or I can just go ahead and update the target model like right now, and just go ahead and apply these objects to the target model. And it will also do a process recalc. So it's deployed the metadata. It's now doing the process recalc. So the options I had in the options dialog said, don't do a full refresh, don't query the source system, but just do a process recalc to ensure that the model is queryable. And I had different options there. So I've done this. Now I refresh, and you will see that everything that that was different that I deployed is now the same, like the calculation group. Here is the calculation item. You can see it's now the same, right, in the source and the target, right? But the things that I skipped are still different, right? The game table is still different. I still have the partitions in the target, but not the source, right? So I just picked and choose what I wanted to deploy. So this is, as you can see, this is very useful for these types of scenarios. I didn't have to wait a long time to reload all of the historical data. And another thing I can do, if I'm basically done now. So what am I going to do? I'm going to actually save this comparison to a file, an ALMT file, right? So I save this. Now I close Power BI Desktop. No, sorry, I close ALM Toolkit, and now I reopen it from the that same file, right? And it remembers the source, the target. It remembers the options. It remembers the skip items. It remembers everything, so that once this is run, it will be in exactly the same state that I was in just before I closed ALM Toolkit, right? It's the same skip items and everything. Why is this relevant? This is useful because when you're deploying these changes, quite often it's exactly the same objects that you want to skip. You want to skip the same game table because you don't want to mess with the partitions. You want to, you want to skip the same roles because you have different membership in test and production. You don't need to reselect everything manually and have a higher risk of user error by having to select everything manually, right? So like with BISM Normalizer in the old days, this is the old UI that's all WinForms. This is not the Chromium hosted one. You can have a separate file for maybe for your different environments if you want, for example. That's something that people would often do. So you can store the configuration and reopen it, and you don't need to reselect everything every time, if that makes sense. So with that, Ricardo, I think I'm done in terms of my demo. So if you want to maybe open it up for some more questions for the last few minutes.
Yep. Yes, we have some more questions.
Okay.
Okay. The first one is why don't you put simply the large models on by default?
Okay. So good question. So the main reason. Well, the main reason is that large models doesn't work in Pro, right, on the share capacity for architectural and technical reasons. So if you have a workspace with a large model, and then you take that workspace and you put it in Pro, that large model is not accessible, right? And so you just need to be aware of it. Plus, you can't download to PBIX, like we were saying earlier. There's a few differences that means we can't put it on by default. Maybe one day we will, maybe one day, but for now, we would need to change the way that download to PBIX works, because today it's incompatible with download to PBIX, and we would need a solution for Pro as well. But maybe one day we will solve that, and maybe one day it will be on by default. We did actually, at the beginning of when we started talking about this, we did consider that, and maybe one day we will, but today we can't.
Perfect. And Amedeo that asked some question about the download from the large models and so on. Told us that the download of the Power BI template, it will be a great as well.
Great. Lobby for it. Ask for it. ideas.powerbi.com. Ask Marco and Alberto to ask for it on Twitter, and then everyone will ask for it, right? And then we'll end up doing it. All right.
Okay. Good. And we have received the same question at the same time from two people. So I'll try to summarize in one single, and in case I will add more content. Marco is asking if you can advise the best way or best practice for version controlling in Power BI, and that's this question got a lot of thumbs up. So I think it's an interesting question for many people, and I'm very interested in it as well.
Okay, so with XML Endpoint, you can do the same version control that you had in analysis services in terms of integration with source control, with DevOps, and you can have automated deployments. You can use tablet editor to do automated deployments. And so everything that you could do for version control in analysis services, you can do in Power BI because of the XML endpoint. Now, the bit that's missing is the Power BI desktop authored data sets, right? If you use just tablet editor, then version control integration with DevOps is fine. But if you're using Power BI desktop, it doesn't work. Why? Because of the same problem we've already discussed a few times now, right? Which is that Power BI desktop is very jealous. If you take the metadata file and you do a diff and merge, or you do a rollback to previous version, if Power BI desktop didn't create that file and it didn't put that file in the PBIX itself, it will not allow it, right? So the problem is with PBIX files, again, we want to solve this. It's the same solution for all of these things, right? For download to PBIX, for external tools, modifying all of the metadata of the data set, for integration with source control from the Power BI desktop file. It's all about the desktop hardening so that it will not crash if it loads data set metadata that it did not create itself. The same reason, right? So again, you can do everything with version control that you had with analysis services. And we have to do this desktop hardening work to be able to make it work for Power BI desktop, which will be a lot of work, but we will do it eventually. Okay. Okay.
And more or less, it's the same questions from Eduardo, but I'll read it and I read it, and maybe there are some little differences. Is there a way or a best practice to integrate ALM Toolkit with DevOps in Power BI implementation project, so we can still use DevOps and integrating ALM Toolkit for versioning, branching, and merging a PBIX file instead of GitHub?
Yeah, so you can run it from the command line, and if I were to open up the program files installation directory, there is a bism normalizer.exe. You can do everything that you can do in the UI from the command line, and some people do run it in a DevOps pipeline, as long as it's a Windows-based one. But then you can also use Tablet Editor. You can use the Analysis Services Deployment Wizard. Tablet Editor has some fantastic capabilities there. So technically, yes, you can run it from the command line. I have many people doing it. I've had to add a bunch of parameters to the command line thing because of people using it. But there are other ways to do it as well. Like Tablet Editor is a really good way to do automated deployment for CI/CD with DevOps pipelines and things like that. So there's different ways you can do it. But yeah, you can do it. And if you want further information on that, I can provide a link with the link to the deck for a detailed documentation on some of the detailed things, including running it from a command line. I can provide a link for that, Ricardo.
That will be great. If you can insert in the deck, we will share with the community.
Yes,
there's
absolutely.
Just one last question, and we are almost at the end, so we can go for this. This is more about analysis services in general. Amedeo is asking if you can explain a little bit more about processing option. I think process full, process clear, process index, and so on, that maybe he spotted in your screenshots about the different processing in ALM Toolkit.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking that. So as you see here, you have the recalc, the default, the do not process in full, and there's some other ones as well, like that are not shown here, like process clear. If you want to clear all the data, there's process data that processes just the data but does not recalc the objects for DAX querying. There's process add that lets you do a kind of a delta refresh that's very efficient but very advanced. So there are some other more advanced options that are not listed here, right? But for these ones specifically, So the recalc is going to just make sure that the hierarchies, the relationships, the data is ready to be queried by DAX. It does not query the source system. It doesn't run any SQL queries on the source system. It just makes sure that everything is ready to be queried by DAX, right? So, you know, if I add some new relationships, for example, I would need to do a recalc for it to for the DAX queries to work successfully, right? Process default. This one will check the status of each table, and if it's already in a process state, it doesn't do anything. But if it's an unprocessed state, then it processes it only as required, right? This is an easy way to, if you're just adding a new table, but you don't want to wait a long time to refresh the whole model, you can do this one. And you can also do that with process only affected tables as well, that it will know that if the table didn't have any changes, it won't touch it, right? Then the other one is do not process, don't do anything. Don't even do a recalc, do nothing, right? And then the other one is process full. So process full, if you have a large model, you probably wouldn't want to do it from here. You would want to switch over to SSMS. You would probably set it to do not process, and then you switch over to SQL Server Management Studio or something like that, and then you do your process there, where and you can see the detailed output and everything, right? You can do process full for a small model, that's fine, but if it's a very big one, it can take a long time, right? So, but the option is there, but maybe you wouldn't use it for anything that would take a long time. So those are the options there, and as I say, that this is not the full list of processing options that you get with analysis services through the XML endpoint, but these are the ones that are here in ALM Toolkit.
Perfect. Sounds good. Well,
okay.
We end up with all the questions, and what to say? I would like to say thank you very much, Christian, for being here with us. And it's been a pleasure having you. I would like to remind all our users that next week we will end up the external tools series. So we will have Daniel Otik for talking about tabular editor. So don't miss it. And as always, we have recorded this session. You will find it on YouTube channel. And Christian Wade is has told us that we'll share the deck with some very interesting information in that, and you will find it in the Power BI community repository. So with that, thank you very much, Christian. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we can meet somewhere after this pandemic crisis will end. And
yes.
If we can, we will wait here in the Power BI user group another time for another astonishing session, as always.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. Thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to seeing you in person. Maybe I'll visit you in Italia one day. We'll see. So we'll keep fingers crossed.
Yes, we will look forward. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye. See you next time.